Hey everyone, I am here to do a video for my top 25 albums of 2020. I wanted to get that done before I did anything for 2021. My top 50 for 2021, I shared kind of one album at a time and had a lot of fun with people on Twitter. This previous list, I had just joined or just kind of became active on Twitter as I was doing it. So some people may have missed this. There's a lot of albums here that I know a lot of people that I follow and vice versa are big fans of. I'm going to try and go as fast as possible. I know people's time is valuable, and for the few people out there who think that this video isn't long enough when it's done, definitely let me know. And if people are interested in having a long video that they can just choose to watch all at once or whatever, I'm totally fine with that. I never get sick of talking about albums that I love. So let's kick it off with number 25. This is Revenge, Strike, Smother, Dehumanize. This is on Season of Mist Underground Activist. If you've heard this band, you know what to expect. Crazy abrasive, crazy loud, basically hardcore punk ran through a lo-fi black metal kind of vibe. The band does a number of things very, very well, but what they really achieved on this album is texture and layers of abrasive noise. There are straightforward punk rock riffs on here. There is some cool black metal dynamics that are really interesting with just a few members of the band just making an unholy racket. In general, this is a very difficult to listen to album that actually rewards you after you've listened to it several times and you can kind of identify the riffs and the motifs that they're going for. But the band's ability to create these, like I said, these layered textures of just bizarre noise, really, really powerful stuff, and definitely an extension of hardcore punk. But like I said, if you're into black metal, if you're into really, really heavy hardcore, this is just an absolute can't miss. They've had some good albums in the past. To me, this is their most mature, most fully realized album. So highly recommended. Check that out, number 25. Just a small note, the order for these is my personal preference. Based on how many times I've listened to them, going back to them time and time again, even down to stuff like cover art. The presentation of the vinyl has had an impact because I've lived with these albums for, almost some of them almost 2 years now. I'm not necessarily saying that an album above in the order is a better album. It just has that resonation with me where I've, visited it more, or it meant a little bit more to me. So. Number 24, Afterbirth, Four-Dimensional Flesh. This is on Unique Leader Records, an absolutely gorgeous gatefold, which this album absolutely deserved. Very, very cool sci-fi death metal. It isn't sci-fi in the typical sense of just being kind of like over the top and noodly. There isn't a lot of like wankery on this album. It's just really, really, really well made. The songwriting here just carries the entire thing from start to finish, even though it's a very dense, powerful album. The whole time you just feel engaged. You feel like the songs are accessible. The band is doing stuff that you may have heard before, but when all the elements come together, they create something very, very new. Sci-fi death metal that's not overly weird. It's still accessible. It'll still appeal to fans of old school death metal that like things simple, for lack of a better word, because the album is accessible and you can sit down and listen to it in one sitting and really, really feel what they were going for. So Afterbirth, awesome album. They're on Twitter now, and I think a new album is coming, which I'm very excited about. Number 23, Wayfarer, Romance with Violence. This is on Profound Lore Records. This is the band's fourth album. They're out of Colorado. A lot of people are onto this band from not just this album being incredible, but the Stormkeep album that came out last year. Basically the same band with one member swapped out. Wayfarer has been honing their sound for their 4 albums. I like all of their releases, but I think that this one is definitely their crowning achievement so far. Western themed, atmospheric black metal with some great melody, lots of good dynamics that make it a really cinematic experience. Beautiful presentation, of course, from Profound Lore that really matches the music. This is one of those albums that I was already a fan of the band. When I saw the hype for this album, I got very excited, but it did take a few listens to really really get into this. I think that's because it isn't overly heavy, it isn't overly aggressive. What it achieves instead is a different vibe. It takes you someplace. And not just someplace, but on a journey from the start of the album to the end. So if you really buy in, you give it your full attention, it's pretty engaging. Like I said, cinematic is the key word, where you can see where they're taking you with the music. I think almost everybody has heard this one, and a lot of people are big fans of it. But if you've been holding out, very much recommended. It's almost like a concept album experience from like maybe like mid 70s. They are pushing the boundaries of a genre like black metal, but instead of doing it from a songwriting perspective, they're doing it from a motif, a theme, a cinematic experience. So definitely check this out if you haven't heard it yet. Most of you have. So Wayfarer, awesome album. Up next, Cryptic Shift, Visitations from Enceladus. I think everybody, if everybody was a fan of Wayfarer, absolutely everybody was a fan of this album. I saw this on countless best of lists. Very, very well deserved. This is on Blood Harvest Records out of Sweden. Um, Again, beautiful presentation of a completely crazy album. This is another sci-fi death metal album, but unlike Afterbirth, instead of adding sci-fi elements to death metal, they really do push the envelope here and almost make just like a sci-fi metal creation. The reason for that is because this is not about death. It's about a place beyond death, beyond life. It creates an entirely new world to inhabit. It's still filled with terror. It's still filled with kind of a sickly hope for escape, but the actual vibe of it, the actual feel, very much matches that cover art where you don't know where you are, you don't know what you're doing, but you continue to plod forward because the music is so engaging. This one does not need my endorsement. Everybody loved it. If you still haven't heard this one, it is a very, very, very well done album to just sit down and kind of take in. Really demands your full attention because of how much crazy stuff is going on, but I would definitely recommend checking it out. Cryptic Shift, Visitations from Enceladus. People pronounce that differently. Definitely leave me a comment if you know it's something different. Up next, Catalapsy, Terra Mortus Est, some Latin for you guys. Absolutely gigantic, double LP. I would say brutal death metal, but that might turn some people off that should absolutely not avoid this album. Yes, it has some slam elements. Yes, it's very dense and swirling, but the songwriting, the way this album kind of unfolds, the band's ability to create these textures and sounds and moments that do not all kind of run together is really, really something to behold. If you've heard their previous stuff, they continue to mature when it comes to the songwriting, but also the production, the mix, the variety. The band's ability to tell a story through music is just unbelievable. This is already another one on Unique Leader. There's going to be several of them on this list. I don't know how they had such an incredible 2020. Their 2021 kind of left me cold, but this album especially, very accessible despite being gigantic, one of a kind. You're not going to find another a double LP death metal album like this. There's so much stuff going on in here, just jammed into every second of music. Very, very cool record. I listened to it a lot. Highly recommended. Catalapsy from Russia. They know death metal. Up next, Ulcerate. Stare into death and be still. Debebor Morty put this out. Ulcerate has bounced around a little bit. The only reason this isn't higher on my list is because I've been listening to these guys from their very first demo release, and while it didn't necessarily impress me as much as most people, maybe people who were new to the band or who hadn't been keeping up with them for a while, it's an incredible album. These guys have not changed their sound one bit from the moment they were formed. They've just gotten better and better at it. The swirling, dissonant, kind of blackened death metal that's very, very focused on these kind of serpentine riffs that kind of come in, go out. You can't really keep up with them until you've listened to the album several times. The atmosphere is so thick, it's just absolutely dreadful in a good way. This is one of those bands that once you hear them, if you like them, go back, listen to all of their stuff, because from the very, very get go, when they started out as a metallic hardcore band 15, 16 years ago, probably longer, they were on Willowtip Records and they were just one of the best metallic hardcore bands going. Their riffs were better, their production was better, their dynamics were better, and now, whatever it is, 20-ish years later, they're at the top of their game, they're at the top of the genre. You hear their influence in more and more bands. This is going to be a huge influence on future metal, I believe, because of that atmosphere. It's not about these riffs that make you bang your head, although there are some on here. It's much more of kind of the old Maxell tape advertisement where you just sit in a chair and be blown back by the wholeness of it. So most people have checked this one out. Highly recommended you check out their other stuff if you haven't. Ulcerate out of New Zealand. Next, something similar in tone but definitely different in approach is Leeched. To dull the blades of your abuse. This is on Prosthetic Records. This band is out of the UK. I believe this is their second or third album. This is, to me, to steal a phrase from Refuse, this is kind of the shape of punk to come, in my opinion. If somebody was, coming around, what's punk rock like these days? This is the album that I would give them because it has that misanthropic, furious at the world kind of vibe. But they add in these layers of kind of industrial noise, ultra aggressive approach to everything that they do. The songs themselves have some catchy riffs in them, but really this is about that wash of abrasive noise. They make such an unbelievable amount of noise on this album. And this is one of those records that you sit down and you listen to, and it's going to be a cathartic experience, whether you want it to be or not, because it's just so intense. Really, really heavy. They just dial in this rage that really sustains the album from start to finish. Obviously, this is an album that I highly recommend to people, but I especially recommend it to people who are curious about people pushing the envelope, because unlike, say, a brutal death metal album or a really, really dark black metal album, this still feels like a rock band. It still feels like a group of guys who wanted to get together and make music together. There's nothing otherworldly about it. It's just incredibly bleak and heavy, engaging. Really, you feel for the musicians that they're going through this level of pain and suffering on our behalf. So very, very cool album. Leeched, check it out. It's certainly not going to put you in a great mood outside of recognizing how good of an album it is, but really good stuff. Next up, Astralborn, Eternity's End, another prosthetic record release. Totally different from Leeched. This is melodic death metal in the best possible sense. Very, very cool melodies, wildly aggressive approach, like dive bomb guitar solos, riffs kind of interconnecting with each other. The band is a trio, but it sounds like 5 or 6 musicians at once. Just the layers of music that they put out with this one. Really, really catchy, really, really accessible. If you're a fan of stuff like early In Flames, At the Gates, stuff like that, this takes it, but it pushes it even more in the direction of accessibility, melody, kind of that fire and ice vibe that I especially like a lot, where you have these cool tones, but they're delivered with a really, really aggressive performance. And on top of that, the melodies are just fantastic. I heard this album by accident, I think, just random on Spotify. And it's not something that you forget. These riffs are so, so solid. Really, really well done album. The band is on Twitter. I really hope that they have new stuff coming. I've played the hell out of this one, and it is one of my favorites. So, Astralborn. Next is a companion piece to that, an album that is very, very similar. It's the only real difference in this album, outside of being, the songwriting, of course, is different, is it's a little on the cooler side. And this is Inexorum, Moonlit Navigation on Iliad Media. Very similar to Astralborn in the sense that it's very, very aggressive, like ultra dialed in, very intense, melodic black metal. It definitely skews more towards black than death, but there's a little bit of both in here for sure. This is one of those albums you only have to hear once. The melodies will grab you. The way that the album is kind of laid out with some really long songs and a little bit of like interlude to kind of break it up. Very, very cool. Very well done. The guitars on this are especially fantastic. Fits the cover art perfectly. It has this kind of seeking, searching energy, a restlessness to it. And of course, any water metal goes to the top of my list, and this is just a beautiful example of it. It has this unsettling, unnerving sense of songwriting, but at the same time, you feel like you're getting somewhere, you're traveling somewhere and experiencing it. Warm, warm tones on the guitars, cool riffs, very, very, very well done album. Inexorum, Moonlit Navigation, highly recommended. People check that out if they haven't. Up next, Unrequited, Empathica. This should probably be higher as far as like personal connection. I've told the artist on Twitter before, I feel like they wrote this album for me. It is basically the soundtrack to a movie that no one will ever see. It's the soundtrack to another place, another time. And as cheesy as it sounds, kind of another you. It will really draw you in if you give it a chance to let the melodies affect you. The layers of orchestration, there's not a lot of vocals on here, but they're effective and very moving. And on top of that, it just sounds absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely beautiful use of synths on this. Their other albums have a similar vibe, but this I feel is just the best thing that they've ever done melodically, from a compositional standpoint, the art, it all comes together really beautifully. Because this was work appropriate, I listened to this album almost every day. I would put it on when I got to work in the morning, and it would be kind of like our get started kind of vibe. I have a lot of great memories of successes at work while this album was playing, so that ties into it too. But this is just a gorgeous album, not something I would ever expect to hear. As a heavy metal fan and you're just checking out new stuff, this is not something that I expected to hear, but I'm so happy that I did. Absolutely beautiful album. Highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. Empathica from Unrequited. Up next, we have Incantation, Sect of Vile Divinities. Anytime Incantation puts an album out, it's probably going to be in my top 25 for that year. They're one of my favorite bands. I'm a lot less judgmental when it comes to them putting out new music. It doesn't have to be completely amazing or blow my mind for it to be a favorite of mine, because they have always been doing their thing. They're always going to do their thing. And really, this is a fantastic album. I think some people were a little bit underwhelmed by it because it is a little bit of a narrow approach. There are no huge moments in this, there's no overwhelming heaviness. It's just a collection of great death metal songs. It's mostly mid-paced, but as the album continues, especially on side B, there's some doom stuff that they do so well. The kind of like rumbling double bass drum, almost like quicksand kind of forming and just like allowing you to sink into it. There's a bunch of moments like that on this album where you're just kind of hypnotized by the ritualistic approach to it. Like I said, nothing out of the ordinary. They did not try to do anything to like change up their style, but they're so good at songwriting. They're so tight as a band. And the actual album itself is not overly long or drawn out. It's just really, really well paced and really well done. On the off chance you skipped this one, I highly recommend it. If you're a fan of the band and you check out all their stuff and this one kind of left you, wanting, I would check it out again. It especially sounds good when you compare it to the average death metal album that is coming out these days. There's a confidence to it and a flow to it that's really, really appreciated. But Incantation, they can do no wrong. I'm already ready for their next album. This is a great one, so check it out if you have time. Next, something totally different. Unleash the Archers, Abyss. Gorgeous double LP. This one is on Napalm Records out of Germany. Power metal, incredibly catchy, some of the best vocals I've heard in years. The songs are so well done and dynamic that just a single song on here has the effect of listening to an entire album from a lot of power metal bands. The layers of orchestration, keyboards, vocals, guitars, even the drumming on this kind of stands out, which is pretty rare for power metal. But the band's ability to write a catchy melody is really on display here. If you strip these down to like an acoustic guitar and the vocals, they're beautiful pop songs that are going to get stuck in your head and they're memorable. Add into add in all of the touches that they've included here, and this becomes a genuine epic. I mean, this is a gigantic album, beautifully presented here with the double LP. I've listened to this album so much, another work appropriate one that my coworkers had to listen to over and over and over. Never get sick of it. Incredibly impressed with the songwriting. And like I said, the vocals is what sets this one apart. The quality of the melodies, the quality of the songwriting, the pacing of the album, the professionalism, it's all top notch. But the vocals is what makes it, one of the best of the year. And if you haven't heard this and you're even remotely accepting of power metal or even if you just like pop music, if it's not metal enough, just look at this as a pop record and you are going to love it. The songs are so accessible. Awesome band. Love this album. Unleash the Archers. Up next, another U album. There's a bunch of U albums on here. This is Uada. Jin. How to describe this album? If you describe it as black metal purists will probably be quite annoyed. If you describe it as punk rock, I think people will think that you are oversimplifying, but I don't. If you listen to the very first riff on this album, it could be a Offspring riff. It could be from a NoFX album. Their ability to create catchy, guitar-driven melodies is very, very much reminiscent of punk rock. Now, the rest of the approach is certainly black metal. The vocals are very blackened. There are moments on the album that are especially dark and swirling and kind of dissonant. But in general, I think of this as just a very dark punk rock album that's done very, very well. It's catchy, it's memorable. The tones that the band kind of throws together to make these layered songs are really, really incredible. It's a double LP, but it's a long album, but it goes by quickly because of the way the songs are structured. 6 long songs, lots of dynamics, lots of layers. If you haven't heard this, check it out. You'll know by the first song whether it's something that you're interested in. The band's been around for a while, and I think that this is probably their most accessible album to date. Beautiful presentation from Eisenwald. Everything they put out is amazing. I wish I could buy it all, but it's very expensive. But I am glad to have this one. Little side note, this was the 25th of 25 physical copies that I needed to make this video. So I finally got this from Hell's Headbangers a couple weeks ago for pretty cheap, honestly, compared to what it's been going for on Discogs. But once I got this, I could make the video, and I've already listened to this several times on my stereo. Very, very cool. Punk rock, black metal, whatever you prefer. Up next, Megaton Sword, Blood Hails Steel, Steel Hails Fire. You knew this was going to be on here. I post this all the time. Before I had the LP, I just shared the album until people told me to shut up. Now that I have the LP, I can't stop sharing it. I listen to this one all the time. Another work appropriate album, new wave of British heavy metal, very, very catchy. It has just the perfect balance of kind of silly Dungeons and Dragons, Braveheart kind of vibes, and more serious, heavy, aggressive, heavy metal vibes. The songwriting here is what makes the difference. The vocals are great, the instrumentation is great, but the songs themselves are really catchy. The album flows beautifully. 8 songs, all about equal length, all about equal quality. There's never a moment on this album that you get bored or you're disinterested, and they even have some slower stuff on here that approaches kind of like balladry, but you still have that heaviness, that fire in the background, and the vocals. The vocals are what kind of lift the songs, even when the melodies aren't like overly captivating, although most of them are. I think most people that would be interested in this have already heard it, but again, pop music, any kind of heavy metal, any kind of accessible stuff that you could play for your coworkers and things like that. This is a really, really great one. Of course, a really, really beautiful presentation from Dying Victims Productions. I ordered this from them, the second press of it from Germany. Nowadays, you can usually get their stuff from Hell's Headbangers and a couple other places, but I was very happy to get this. Beautiful album, Megaton Sword. Very highly recommended, as you already know. Up next, Malocarpitan. Krupinski Oni. This should probably be number one, from the sense of how important an album was to me, how much it impressed me, how much it stuck in my head, how frequently I went back to it. It's a little bit lower on the list just because I couldn't say no to the stuff that was higher. But everybody knows I love this band. I have all of their stuff. They are one of the most original bands in heavy metal today, I feel. Their ability to blend styles as opposed to having these disparate elements that they jump back and forth between is really impressive. You have folk elements, you have traditional heavy metal, you have black metal, you even have folk music that's not heavy. And their ability to mix those styles together to form their own kind of sound is just very, very impressive to me. This is a co-release between Invictus and the Anja Offensive. Their stuff is usually harder to find, but Invictus stuff you can find. I got very lucky and found this on Discogs for a good price. If you haven't heard this album, listen to it today. It is one of a kind, even compared to their other albums, which are themselves one of a kind. This is just really, really special. I think I got this from Timmy T. He recommended this at the end of the year. And like most of his recommendations, it just completely hit the spot. I fell in love with the band and have already gone back to all their other stuff. Yeah, just an original heavy album that does a little bit of everything and it does it all beautifully well. Incredibly talented band. Like I said, one of a kind. You're not going to hear anything else that sounds like this, or is quite as mature from like a totality. The entire album just kind of stands head and shoulders above a lot of others that try and kind of do this folky, woodsy, mixed metal kind of thing. Awesome album, Malocarpitan. You can't go wrong with any of their stuff. Up next, we have Obscene, The Inhabitable Dark, another one on Blood Harvest Records. These guys are from Ohio. This is tailor-made for somebody who grew up listening to hardcore punk and then got into metal afterwards. This is metallic hardcore of the highest quality, very, very pissed off, rage fueled hardcore punk that has lots and lots of metal laid on top of it. The songs are relatively short, the compositions are relatively simple, but the intensity of the performances and the quality of the songwriting just blows me away. I listen to this album all the time. If you're into hardcore, this will be a can't miss for you. If you're tolerant of kind of like a, for lack of a better word, kind of like a circle pit kind of vibe in your metal, you're going to love this. This is just one of those albums that you put it on, it goes hard. There's no weak moments, and then it's over before you know it. Obscene, The Inhabitable Dark, very heavy, very cool. Check this one out if you haven't. Up next is what I know everybody has heard. This is Undeath, Lesions of a Different Kind, another prosthetic release. Old school death metal with a new school energy. Songwriting is what sets this one apart. Catchy riffs, hooky vocals. The vocal hooks on this album are incredible. They help identify the songs. They help keep each song a separate entity where it's its own experience. To be honest, none of the songs on here sound the same. Death metal gets a bad rap for all the songs sounding the same a lot. A lot of metal does. But this is one of those really, really well-defined records where each song feels like its own thing. You can tell they worked on it. You can tell that they wanted to set out to create an actual album experience of great songs instead of just having a pile of songs they threw on an album. Everybody, I think, has heard this. On the off chance you've avoided it, you need to fix that right away. Their new album is already coming. Undeath, Lesions of a Different Kind, one of the leaders of the new school. I have a pair of CDs. The only CDs on this list, the only reason they're CDs is because they are CD-only releases. And the first one is Ossuary Annex. Obscurantism, Apogee. This is on Extreme Music out of Spain. These guys are from Russia. Brutal death metal, kind of a industrialized killing machine kind of vibe. Great songwriting, awesome riffs, fantastic vocals, really flows well. There's some dynamics and some interludes here. There's some guest musicians that really elevate the stuff that they're on. For me, the reason why it's so high on this list is it's a great album with the best drums of the year. This gets my vote for best drums. Absolutely otherworldly, inhuman performance that doesn't sound like a computer or a machine. It sounds like a behemoth of a person behind a gigantic drum set playing as hard as they can, like their life depended on it. This went in my car stereo when I got it just a few weeks after it was released. It had to get here from Spain. It didn't leave my car for maybe 7 months. And usually I'm like a 1-2 listen kind of person and swap something out. But no matter how many times I listened to this, how many times it came on, that drum sound and the way that it kind of drove the entire production just drew me in, and a very, very easy to listen to album from start to finish. Despite being on the brutal slammy side, they don't overdo anything. It's all within this very like it's like a fight in a phone booth kind of sound. And just for the drums alone, you need to hear this album. All of their records are awesome, but this is like they kicked it up a notch in a major, major way. Ossuary, Annex, Obscurantism, Apogee, our first CD on the list. This next one, I know a lot of people will be expecting. This is still to me the most underrated album of the year. This is a Curion, Come Forth to Me. Super group with Mike DeSalvo, Oliver from Cattle Decapitation, the guitarist from Neuraxis. Uh, yeah, this is just a one of a kind album. I talked about Mellow Carpeton. You won't hear another album that sounds like this. I don't think you'll ever hear another album that sounds like this because I don't think the band is going to record anything new. This is actually a pretty old recording that was finally released just in 2020, of course. This is an album of tech death, progressive death metal that doesn't need any gimmicks. It doesn't need to be overly brutal. It doesn't need to be, run through a filter or all kinds of effects. What it achieves is the most intense performances imaginable, from the vocals to the drums and the riffs. My God, the riffs on this album are insane. The sound that just one guitar player is able to produce is a bigger sound, a heavier sound, a more intriguing sound than most bands do with, multiple overdubs and multiple guitar players. The first time you listen to this album, it's a different experience. There's some strange melodic moments. There's a really long interlude that I admit I skipped that really breaks up the album in a strange way. There's some strange choices, basically, but the heart of the album, the guitar riffs, the performances, are just on another level. They don't nothing else compares to how hard this band goes, how well they're able to achieve the sound that they're going for. So if you haven't heard this one, please check it out. I still consider it the most underrated album of the year. A Curion, Come Forth to Me, 2 CDs on the list. Up next, we're at number 6 right now, so we're about to get into the top 5. We have Necrophiliac, No Living Man is Innocent. Another release on Extreme Music out of Spain. My favorite story of all these albums, this is the band's comeback album after, I think, 25 years. Something absurd like that. Like, I don't even know how they found each other in the phone book, but this album is gigantic. It's a concept album about evil people on Earth, so you have everything from, like, fairy tales to Jeffrey Dahmer and things like that. The lyrics are fantastic. It is a very strange mix of traditional heavy metal and very old school death metal. The production is a little bit flat. You feel that it was done on a budget, maybe because they hadn't done anything in 25 years. But outside of that, this is like a perfect album to me. And the fact that it's so long and winding and weird and, a comeback after 25 years and it's as good as it is, all adds points to it. It all kind of pushed it up on my list. I can't really describe it. It's weird. It's dark. It's kind of distant. There's a very strange airiness to the way the songs kind of come in and go out. You have the songs on here that are absolutely epic. I think there's a 9-minute song on here, an 8.5-minute song. but they're not like doom, drone, extended, interludes kind of songs. They're one riff after another, pummeling drums, really dark vocals. I don't know how they did this. I'm going to keep recommending this album to people. Um, yeah, it's just one of those ones that absolutely shocked me. I remember I read the description and I was like, okay, I guess I'll listen to this. And for it to be as good as it is with these guys in their, late 40s, early 50s. Yeah, welcome back, boys. You guys absolutely killed it. Necrophiliac, no living man is innocent. I definitely agree with that sentiment. Awesome album. All right, we're into the top five. This is a long video. I hope people are enjoying it. I had to do it. Number five, Faceless Burial, Speciation on Misako Unholy Records. Whew. Rumbling tech death, very heavy. It's just a trio, but they make an ungodly amount of noise. There's a weird sci-fi vibe to the entire album, but it never gets in the way of pure old school rumbling death riffing. The vocals and the drumming on this are especially over the top. With how crazy the guitar riffs are for the rhythm section to keep up at all is very impressive. This is one of those albums that from the very moment it starts, you can tell this is going to be a little bit different. It's not a lot different. It's a little bit different. It takes that weird otherworldly grimness that you hear on a lot of kind of sci-fi influenced death metal albums, but instead of going weird and wild and long, they go short, fast, and angry. Whatever world that they've wound up in, they are fighting like hell to get out of it alive. There's just such a great like youthful energy to this album. Another band I consider like one of the genuine leaders of the new school because everything they've done has been incredible, and this is definitely their finest moments so far. If you haven't heard this, check it out. Faceless Burial out of Australia. Number four, Deranged, Deeds of Ruthless Violence. This band has been around forever. The last few albums that they put out, they've really found their sound. Sort of a simple, straightforward death metal sound with those little twists in the songwriting. Lots of hooky moments. The vocals on this album are especially catchy. They help kind of like a lot like on Death, they kind of like separate the songs into their own unique experiences. The themes are pretty pretty straightforward. I mean, this is a very pissed off and dark album, but the experience is not dark at all. It's very energized. It very much makes you want to kind of get up out of your seat and stomp the shit out of somebody or something. I love everything about this album. I would listen to it so many times. It's so easy to listen to. It's like a little bit over a half hour. All the songs are perfection. There are some unexpected twists and turns here that unlike in like an avant-garde kind of setting, they are actually like welcome. You're like, whoa, like that really took me to a different place. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. So I can't recommend this one enough. Wound up at number four on my list. It also drew me back to their older stuff that I've listened to a ton since then, but this is still, I think, my favorite from them. So Deranged, Deeds of Ruthless Violence. This is on Agonia Records. All right, we're really, really almost done now. We've got our top three now. Number three, Leviatha, Lightless. Another prosthetic records release. This one is probably the most surprising album on my list. This is like doom rock, maybe think Black Sabbath, but a little bit more melodic. Very, very cool concept album about life and death and the fact that human beings are the only creature that knows they're going to die. It's an incredibly dark topic with some really, really deep, dark music, but it still has that feeling of hope. It still has that melodic intensity and the ability to draw you in with like a beautiful guitar moment or a nice vocal moment. So it's not off-putting, it's not abrasive, it's not difficult to listen to. It's a very warm, kind of fill the room kind of album with sound. Um, I've listened to this one many, many times. It's very catchy. The songs all stand on their own as their own thing, but as an album, it just impresses the hell out of me. To hear a rock album, basically a rock band, achieving something like this, it just kind of blows my mind for how long the genre has been around and how many artists have tried this style. Everything about this album is gorgeous, and I highly recommend it. So, Leviatha, Lightless at number 3. Runner-up for Album of the Year, Sepulchral Curse, Only Ashes Remain on Transcending Obscurity. My favorite's Gatefold Presentation. They just went all out with this one. I mean, you can't get any more beautiful than this. It absolutely matches how beautiful the music is. This is an album of progressive death metal with a very strong leaning towards hardcore punk. There are some churning, dark riffs on here that really, really bring to mind like old school hardcore punk. But the progressive technical death elements are what elevates it. It brings it this new fullness of sound. There are dual vocalists on this album. That's probably the most impressive part from a standpoint of comparing this to the other albums that came out this year. Both vocalists do an amazing job. They're on totally different ends of the register. Sometimes they do vocals together. The heaviness and the dread that it brings about is just unbelievable. I can't say much more about this album. It's the runner-up for Album of the Year out of many hundreds, probably over 1,000 albums that I listened to in 2020. And it just sounds fantastic. The track Into the Depths Unknown, which is the third track, is where I would start if you want to check this band out. The dual vocals on it, the intensity is just through the roof. Absolutely love this band. Check them out if you haven't. I'm ready for something new. Tech, prog, death. You can't do it any better than this. Check it out. Finally, my album of the year. Everybody knows what this one is because I shared it many, many times. Between the music, the cover art, the presentation of the vinyl. I listened to this album more than any other in the year, and it is Stillbirth, Revive the Throne. I could just sit here and look at this art all day, but this is the band's fourth album. Brutal, slamming death metal, but with a fun atmosphere. This is like the entire album is obviously the gladiator theme, Roman history, samples from the movie Gladiator, war sounds. The songs couldn't fit them more perfectly. There's this unbelievable, like, attacking approach to the songs. There are riffs on here that just make you contort your face into these horrible expressions because they're so good. You kind of want to escape from how good this album is, you know. You have to listen to other stuff soon, and it's not going to be nearly as good as this. The band's previous stuff has all been similar, where they have this kind of like fun, they call themselves Stillbirth Party, where it's fun, it's aggressive, it's genuinely designed to entertain the listener as opposed to just be over the top heavy or over the top, nasty or anything like that. Instead, the production is actually really fantastic and clear. The vocals are the most over the top thing you'll hear. The guitar riffs are just from another planet. And the experience of listening to this album from start to finish, it really is life affirming. You're just like, wow, every song was good. It sounds fantastic. Layers of sound, the use of samples from movies, all of it just is absolutely perfect. It just impressed the hell out of me. I never got sick of it. I'm never going to stop recommending it. The LP presentation is so gorgeous. You absolutely cannot go wrong with any of this stuff. Even if you don't listen to the album, you're going to be impressed by the way it looks. Number 1 album of the year, my favorite. Stillbirth, Revive the Throne. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be doing a video for some of my top of 2021 soon. Until then, take care of yourself. I really appreciate all the support. We'll talk soon.